before, or 2 days before the assignment was due in. I suspect that they
Could
are.
be the weather.
No, I think they're just they'll be saving it up for. So actually,
And they've
quite a lot
got
of
the
people
links
here.
as
So
well. A lot of
at
these are
least
TESOL.
5 of the people here were in for the course rep meeting, the RM1 course rep meeting.
Right.
Lisha's TESOL and 2 guys in the road back over there, and these 2 girls here. Yeah. So, I don't. The point is, it's there and it's available. I don't think it.
Necessarily matters if they come along.
Yeah, I don't think it matters whether they're here or not in person because it will be there now. And,
I might ask them to move forward a bit for questions. What do you reckon? Will I get them to move forward a bit, do you think, since there's not many here? Or just leave them?
I'm fine. You just chuck
Shout
the mic
out.
out. Yeah, I mean, all you can do is you
the
can.
microphone.
Yeah.
Is it? I always get them to shout. I did notice you throwing that. How are you? So you guys can throw that out then to the audience. I haven't even brought any water. Like a long talk.
So there's not many people here, but there's lots online watching you. Just to make you a bit more nervous. I had our course rep meeting for sources of knowledge, and somebody from your workshop rep told me about a table that you had, which gave them the terminology in Chinese.
Not in Chinese.
No, okay.
I was helping them to look at the set of validity, reliability,
Uh-huh.
generalizability, what they later understand some different set of terms for interpretive studies.
But they've got that anyway from the work of, that's in the reading anyway. From,
That's in the reading.
yeah.
The problem was that it was in a place for them, so exactly our thing, which is why I didn't think of quite anything new. Exactly.
No, it's just they were saying it was really, really useful. And so I said, oh, well, but I must have misunderstood. I said, I thought they said that you'd done it and you translated bits of it to Chinese from. Okay.
I showed them basically a summary of what they should already see from the reading.
Yeah, okay,
But I think
okay.
they like the table.
Well, if you've got anything that you sent them that you think that we could use next year for the whole course, I mean, I obviously would credit you with it, but I said I would ask. Oh, that reminds me.
So I asked them these terms and whether they understand these terms and relations, and then I gave them this thing as a guide, which I got from LinkedIn. Tell them what these things are actually talking about. And general, but I told them very specifically, this is not absolute, but that's a general trend.
Well, they found it really useful. So whatever it was you did. I mean, you know, a lot of the feedback was, oh, no, it'd be useful if you did this. And I'm like, yeah, we did. It's fine. But overall, it was okay.
And I also, at some point, an overview of what each workshop is for. At the end, because they didn't, I think we didn't understand
Why?
the sense of each workshops are
Right.
in a table of first workshop. That's why we're doing it.
Well, anything, I'll send a note around all the tutors actually, but any supplementary materials that people have used for it that they don't mind feeding in, that would be great, and I'll make them available to, or think about adapting them for next year. Nicola, ready to start. Who's chatting to? Oi, Galloway. She's so rude, she's supposed to be here. Come here. Oh, what are you waiting for? So when you say you've got to rush home, does that mean we can't share a bottle of wine in the Canon's Gate after this?
All the way up to St Andrews on the 6:13 train.
All right, okay.
Just come from there. Next time, get soon. Will I just hold? Yeah. Okay. Yes, soon. Oh. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you much for coming along again this evening to the dissertation support and lectures. So tonight it won't be Gail or myself. Three volunteers, so three PhD students, Alice, Susie, and do you want Bill here? And Bill. And they have offered to give you short presentations on their experience of doing the master's dissertation. So I think it's really nice of them to give up their time this evening and also give up their time to prepare the slides as well. They're going to speak for about 5-10 minutes each, and then we'll open up for a question and answer session. So please do try to think of questions as you're watching the presentations. I think this is a really nice opportunity for you to hear from the PhD students about their experiences. So I will hand over to Alice then. It's probably much more prepared than I am.
Hello? Hello? Okay, can you hear me? Yes. All right, hello, my name is Alice. I'm one of the workshop tutors for this Sources of Knowledge course, and I did my postgraduate master's program, TESOL, a couple of years ago in Moray House. So I volunteered to share what my dissertation was about today. And okay, so as you can see, this is the title of my dissertation, which is Exploring Intercultural Communication in a Studied Abroad Context, Politeness Strategies Used by Chinese Postgraduate Students in Student-Tutor Interaction. It is extremely long as a title, but I was trying really hard actually to try to keep everything that I was trying to talk about in my paper into the title. So, oops, uh-oh. I think okay, this one, great.
Whatever you did, don't do it again.
Okay. Sorry. So these are basically what I reviewed in the literature review, the international communication concepts in international communication, and these in the studies in a study abroad context, and particularly looking at politeness strategies and studies that included Chinese postgraduate students in the UK and the US in EMI context, as well as student-tutor interaction, which is a very neglected area from my own research. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the followings. First, I'm going to explain why I did that research, and then I'm going to tell you the 3 research questions I had, and explain the research design and show you the overall findings, and last I will tell you some advice I'd like to share with you. So why did I do that particular study? So first, I identified some research gaps, and so gaps in literature, which is something you in order to make a contribution to the broader field of literature. So the first one is a look of theory and research on intercultural politeness in the field of intercultural pragmatics. And intercultural pragmatics was something that I found extremely interesting during my reading for the postgraduate program. So I started to look into that area. And the second big gap was the little attention paid to Chinese overseas students' intercultural pragmatic competence in relation to politeness. So I'm looking at Chinese students as a cohort, and they are, especially on the postgraduate level, and their intercultural pragmatic competence, especially in relation to politeness strategy, which is overlooked in the first place. And thirdly, it's because of my own interest coming from a EMI university for my undergrad, and my own experience of dealing with different students from different countries and persons from different countries, that I felt really interested in looking at specific strategies they used in this kind of intercultural communication context. And the research aims for, and the questions I asked were 3. Again, very long questions. I was very wordy during my master's program. So the first one was, what are the politeness strategies adopted by Chinese MSc TESOL students in face-to-face interactions with their tutors? I honestly thought everything was important, so I just put them all in the research question. The second one was, what are Chinese MSc TESOL students' attitudes towards their use of politeness strategies in face-to-face interactions with their tutors? The third one was, what are the tutors' attitudes towards the politeness strategies adopted by da-da-da-da? So basically, I look at the politeness strategies, and I look at different parties' attitudes to that strategies adopted in the interaction. And here's my research design. Overall, it was a qualitative case study. And I had 2 dissertation supervisors who were kindly enough for me to audio record their supervision meetings. And also had 5 MSc TESOL students. So I suppose one of the things I want to highlight is your dissertation doesn't need to be a very large scale study. It needs to be manageable. So although it's not a lot of students, it was a way to demonstrate how you can effectively do a research project. That was the key for doing a dissertation. So it's not a very big scale, but it was interesting, and it's an interesting experience. And I did a pilot study, so I tried out all the instruments And the data collection was, I audio recorded naturally occurring data. By that I mean the supervision meeting. And I was not there, so researcher was absent. I recorded 5 different supervision meetings, and the duration of each meeting was about 70 to 100 minutes. The second set of data was the discourse completion tasks with background questionnaire. So I gave students a set of tasks which are called discourse completion tasks in the form of critical incidents. So I gave them 20 different incidents and asked them what would they do in specific situations to get their feedback on the kind of utterances they would offer. And the next one I did was semi-structured interviews based on the kind of responses they gave me for the discourse completion tasks. And for data analysis, I adopted the postmodern discursive approach, which you might not have heard of, but that was quite trendy in the field that I was looking at. So I found this term and this approach from the politeness strategies in intercultural communication, which is the field I was looking at. And I did the transcription, I used the thematic analysis, and also a combination of inductive and deductive approaches. But with the transcribing process, that was much, much longer than I had expected, which is also something perhaps you need to be careful about, because sometimes you don't have to transcribe everything. You need a good reason to not transcribe everything, but you also need a reason perhaps to transcribe everything in very great detail, which was something I was doing, and I ended up using perhaps way too much time to have very detailed conversational analysis on the interviews that I didn't need to use, to that extent. So just keep in mind when you do something very detailed like a transcription, make sure you know why you're doing that to a certain extent. So this is an overview of what the final chapter looks like. So I had 3 basic, 3 salient themes, which are different as the static and dynamic politeness strategies used by teachers and students in their interaction, and the silence and politeness strategies, different functions and interpretations, and the miscommunications and they're in relation to politeness strategies adopted. Each theme included a set of sub-themes, which is pretty much what it looks like in a dissertation. If you're interested, we can talk more in depth about the finding, but I think this presentation is to show you what it looks like in the process. Now, I want to give you some advice, and I think that would help you a lot at this stage. So regarding the planning and the management process, I would really encourage you to start as early as possible to have a general idea, perhaps which few directions or a few topics you might be interested in, and make sure you have some sort of prior knowledge before you choose a final dissertation topic, because, not in my case, because I was really interested in the topic I wanted to do the dissertation on, but I've also had peer, colleagues or students who didn't seem to know much about what they're going to look at, and then it backfired a little bit. And during your study here, I think perhaps you can keep a database of different references that you think might be useful for your dissertation. Back then, I had a TESOL database of a lot of the books and some of the useful references I thought which might contribute to my final dissertation writing. So I just put them in a folder, which really came in handy. And next one is make a timetable, which you probably don't stick to in the end, but it's important to make a timetable so you have an overall idea of the time allocation for different tasks, because very likely you'll have a lot of changes for different tasks. For me, for example, I had a lot of time spent on the transcription, so maybe you have some other changes. So make sure you're aware of the changes and you can adjust your plan accordingly. And next advice is to be practical. And you can be curious, it's very good because you have to start your project because you're interested in something, you're curious about a field, but also make sure your project is manageable. I think even at PhD level, sometimes we come up with very big, problems we want to solve, but you don't have that much time, so make sure that it's manageable. If you need people to collaborate with you together, to give you consent, make sure you can get them instead of thinking that it's just going to be so easy to get all the consent and people won't, drop out of your study. So not be too ambitious, but do be curious. And last one is, on the slide, is read broadly. So what happened, I think, for me was I started doing, my dissertation, and I realized it was going to different directions. So it's very important that you're aware what are the potential areas of literature there are, so that you're not caught off guard, or you're more informed before you started doing it. You probably won't expect have everything you expected, which is common for most research. But you need to have a broad overview of the general literature field. Okay, this slide is to have establish real expectations. So don't expect to write up everything you research. You're probably gonna do a lot of selection when you actually write and submit, and you're probably gonna cut off a lot of words that you write, which is common. And don't expect to submit absolutely everything you write. Don't expect your supervisors to solve all your troubles, because you might encounter all sorts of troubles, but at the end of the day, you should take the learner autonomy and agency to try to be responsible for your own project. And your supervisor, they have multiple students to supervise, and they have their own other work. So I think it's unrealistic to expect them to know everything about your own project and to spoon feed or babysit, whatever the word is, to make sure everything goes smoothly. So you have to be responsible in that sense, and also to be aware that everything may take a bit longer than you had planned. So even for small things like formatting, which can take much longer than you expect. Now, during your writing, like I said, take responsibility and ownership of your own work. So that's what I was trying to say, is you need to be aware of your own direction, and perhaps you have other students which are doing similar projects, and they might be lost, or they might go different directions, have different approaches. So you just need to be assertive and be true to your own project. And next one, again, everything may take a little bit longer. I think that's throughout my own dissertation and PhD process. I think a lot of things get delayed because the previous task hasn't been done yet. So you have to be aware of that constantly. Now, be organized. So you will have some supervision meetings, and you have your own notes. So I think it's really important to keep the notes and maybe record the supervision meetings if you need it. And also, for me, I had some, dialogues with myself, so I had a lot of reflections. I just put them aside, which later reminded me of some of the things I was thinking about when I was doing the research, and it would help me with the, discussion and the summary. So to keep your thoughts and notes organized. And another example to be organized with your data was, for me, I had different folders for different chapters. Now, for your dissertation, you're probably going to have 6, 7 chapters. And for me, I had a different folder for each chapter. So even if something got really messy or missed, I missed something in a folder, I wouldn't be, I would be losing the whole dissertation. And another advice was is to have different folders for different months. So I had, different folders for different chapters, but I also had different folders for different months. So maybe an April a folder, May a folder, June a folder, or after each meeting you have a new folder, so you're constantly updating and to keep a record of the things that you have changed, which is really helpful, because in the end you just need to put different chapters together instead of just constantly look at different pages in a very, very long document. Now this is just common sense back up, but I think it happens to a lot of people. When you're working on a lot of things, you forget to back up, and there are a lot of incidences where people don't back up, me included, where we just lost some data. So it's really important. Back up your own work, but when it comes to data, some of the data might be very sensitive, so make sure that you don't save it online, you save it in an external hard drive. Yeah, so back up your work. This is a point worth a single PowerPoint slide. I think. And before submission, make sure you leave some time for proofreading, which is really important, and formatting. Like I said, if you're not familiar with, working on a very long document on Word, maybe it takes much longer time for you to format everything, and also takes time for printing and binding. And emergencies, something else might come up. And especially before you submit, because so many schools of students from so many schools are going to submit. So the university, the print shop are going to be very, very busy. So make sure you have that extra time prepared for that. And proofread, I would suggest you do proofread because you might need a different pair of eyes. And sometimes you can ask for proofreaders without submitting the whole dissertation, maybe just chapter by chapter, which might be easier for you. And stay focused, because summer is very, Edinburgh is very lively and interesting with the fringe and everything going on in summer. So don't postpone everything to August, because maybe you're working in the library and there are people dancing and singing outside the library, which might be a great distraction. So make sure you have some time in the middle, between your submission, that you can relax a bit and then go revisit your dissertation. And last point is to submit on time. As I tell my students in my own workshops, it's you know what I mean. So the worst kind of assignment you can do is a late assignment, because you're going to get penalty for late submission, which is not worth it. So just make sure you have enough time to submit your final draft and do it on time. Okay. Lastly, good luck with the rest of your studies, and I wish you all have fun in Edinburgh. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Yes. Ah, perfect. Yes, that's me. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for this. It reminded me of some of the trouble I've gone through myself, and it's been really, really useful advice, so please take it on board. I'm going to talk about my dissertation a little as well. I'm from the field of outdoor education and did my dissertation in 2013, so a couple of years ago. And I don't quite remember everything, but I've probably got enough distance now to see a bit what was important in the process. And so I'm going to briefly talk about my topic and then share some things with you that I maybe struggled with, and that I think now maybe are worth considering. So my research explored students' learning, and in the particular context of an outdoor expedition, which was an expedition across the Swiss Alps. And it's a project that was run by a German school. The teacher, this great guy who just took the curriculum outdoors, basically. In this expedition, he managed to do a real he made possible really interdisciplinary learning during that trip. And so during that expedition, he touched on topics of geology, geography, the multiple languages spoken in the regions that the expedition passed through, architecture, farming, and many more. And this project also tried to create bonds between the students and the environments that they passed through. And I just kind of, how did I get to this? I fell on it because I'm from Germany, and my one of the outdoor education guys said to me, well, there's this project and it's really interesting, so why not jump on it? And I was a bit hesitant because I had thought about doing something else, but then thought, oh, this is a brilliant occasion, so why not try it? And because something I wanted to do, because I have a background and strong interest in diversity education, so intercultural education as well, I wanted to look at the learning from this educational perspective. And so diversity education is an approach which tries to raise awareness for how people experience the world differently and how they have different value orientations, how they learn in different ways, and have multiple identities that impact on the way they see the world, like based on their religion, their ethnicity, their physical ability, their social status, their sexual orientation, all these kind of things. And this educational approach, it makes the claim that students' backgrounds should always be part of any educational programs, really, and that we should learn about diversity in an educational setting. And so then education becomes this communicative space where we also just share interpretations of things that we're talking about. And because this is grounded in the concept of societal pluralism, I was wondering to find out how learning can be pluralistic, really. And I wanted to explore this in theory and then see if I could find some sort of pluralistic learning in this expedition. And so on this picture you can see the part of the group where we had 14 students and 2 teachers, and how they discussed, or how we discussed, the landscapes that we saw in this particular case, looking out over a glacier and how it's melted because of the threat and the reality of climate change. So my methodology, my research was a qualitative inquiry, and my method of data collection was observation, well, partly observation. I went and accompanied that trip to be familiar with the context of the expedition and to see myself what the students were experiencing. But then really my main source of data was interviews. So I had 10 semi-structured interviews with students after the expedition, where they were able to look back on the whole experience, but it was still kind of close enough to the expedition that they could really remember things, and they were still excited about it and emotional. So these were things I wanted to take into account. So I transcribed the interviews. Yes, it does take a lot of time. It was my experience as well. And I analyzed them in a thematic coding approach. So all this, I remember then that all this methodology stuff was really vocabulary that I didn't know before, and only throughout my master's I understood what it was about, and it took me some time to realize how I could apply this in my own little research project. So if you're in the process of engaging with it, don't get scared. There's many things that you can take along as you go, and it'll all make sense when you have your research question, and you can look at what are the useful methods for finding out, or the useful methodology for finding out more. So a brief overview of my findings. I looked at the social dimension of the learning and of an environmental dimension of the learning. And in the social perspective, I found that the students in this expedition context, they found out a whole lot of things about their peers. They realized that they learned and got to know each other much more, and they learned that also the behavior of the students was context dependent. The fact that they spent the whole day, and 10 days actually, the expedition was 10 days together, made them realize of how they only have this tiny little moment they spend together in school, and how they learn so much more about each other when they're just spending more time, and they have the grumpiness in the morning and the excitement in the evening, and there's all sorts of new things happening. They also experienced I witnessed a strong reflection on their own identities. They experienced an aspect of self that was in contrast with the group often. So they explained that, for example, one girl found herself more quiet than the rest of the group. Another girl said that she was actually more mature than the other students. Or something referred to physical ability. Some found themselves less or more fit. So there was something of seeing how they related individually to the group. And also there was conflict. Every great expedition needs a crisis, I guess. So there was a moment of conflict around 3 participants only, but they talked about, almost all of them talked about this. So this showed how they needed to situate themselves in the tensions of these conflicts. And this is something that is also the core of the pluralistic idea, that we need to situate ourselves in the context of conflict. So that was interesting to find. And in the environmental dimension, I found that they really experienced a whole, they observed a whole range of different landscape features, like flora, and they refer to flora and fauna, they refer to lakes, they refer to the socio-cultural environment, to the architecture. So that showed how their view of the landscape was really diverse as well. Sorry. But I also found how they connected to the landscapes themselves, because I witnessed in the data a connecting processes where they linked what they saw with their own individual interests. Sorry, I think I need to, can I get a water bottle? Thank you. Sorry. So they linked the landscapes with their personal interests. For example, there was this girl who talked about how this was like the outer space. Oh my dear! How a particular landscape looked to her like the outer space, and how she was so fascinated by the outer space. And they also linked it back to their home context, so talked about how the life in this tiny little Swiss village might be very different from how life is back home in a city that is much bigger. And a very strong aspect in my research I found as well was that the aesthetic experience of the students was very strong. They talked about how the beauty of the nature affected them, and talked about the colors, but also about how houses were beautifully built, for example. Oh dear. So, just mind the rest of it. Coming to the important parts. So yeah, as a short conclusion, I could see how an outdoor journey, if it is very carefully designed, can really support learning about diversity in a social and environmental perspective. Oh dear, here's something I can, it's okay. So to share some advice with you as well. First, I have three little advice. First thing is choose something that you're interested in, but also be very pragmatic about it, because I wanted to be my dissertation to be the thing, to be something I'm interested in, to be something special which explains the world to me, something really the core of my interest. And I do think it's important to find something you're interested in, because it keeps you going for the stretch of a couple of months. But also, it needs to be really tiny. So if you're a person like me who wants to be everything, who wants to do everything, narrow it down, go to the sadness of leaving stuff behind, and focus on this tiny little question. Because I experienced how it all got bigger and bigger as I read and wanted to do more things. And I think that's a very common experience that your students have in their dissertation. The second thing, no, you're not alone in this. It's sometimes really challenging, and it can be overwhelming at times if you're sitting in this room all day long with this literature and you're just That's fine, thank you. And you're just lost for words and lost in the words. And so just know that your supervisor have a long experience in it. They have excellent capacities to support you through this. And I had Gail with me, which was just the most amazing thing on earth. So make good use of them in the sense that, yeah, don't go to them with all the questions immediately, but maybe make notes of the questions that you have, and when you do get in touch, then don't worry about asking stupid questions, because ask everything, because that will help them understand where you're at. And also, sometimes if you're in the moment of wondering and really confused, just let it sit for 3 days. Go outside, to go to the festival, and come back to it 1 day later, and you will see that things fall into place and that you have new ideas and a new look for all that. So that really helps. And also, knowing that you're not alone in this, talk to friends or family who are not in the same program, who are not doing the same thing, and try to explain to them what you're doing and why you think it matters and what your aims are. And I found that this really helps to clarify for yourself where you are really clear about things, but also where you're not quite clear, and maybe where you need to read more, where you need to discuss things with your supervisors as well. And then also there's some great, very practical, there's some reference programs that you can use. I used a Swiss one, which is called Citavi, but there's also EndNote. So it might be useful to familiarize yourself with like technical stuff that can support you, and also with a couple of little clicks in words you can do editing much more easy. So there's also the technology to support you in this process, which is really useful. And the last thing, be surprised about what comes out of it, because in the moment when you're writing it, you might not immediately always know what it's for. And I found that later in the job that I was doing after the dissertation, I suddenly found myself presenting on it again, or on details of it, and hadn't expected it at all. And what also came out for me from this dissertation is a really long-lasting, still ongoing friendship with the teacher who runs the programs. And he keeps inspiring me with things he does. So yeah, be surprised about things that you may experience later that actually happened through this process. And also the thesis will maybe mean all sorts of different things to you, but it can definitely be a real challenge, but it can also nourish your thinking in very unforeseen ways. So yeah, for me, I guess it's the reason why I'm here. I really enjoyed this process, and I really hope you're gonna be enjoying it as well. And it's what motivated for my PhD, so go for it, and I wish you all the best. And please don't hesitate to get in touch if you want to discuss things, so if you have something related to the dissertation process. And sorry for all the coughing, I guess it's winter. Yeah. I'm not used to speaking to people. That's what you do when you do a PhD. You're just in the office all day long. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Xiaomeng, or you can call me Bill if you prefer. So I'm a second-year PhD student, and at the moment I'm working on my PhD project on pedagogical relationships at master's level. So I received my master's degree 2 years ago at today's date. So I did my master's dissertation in academic year 2015 to 2016, and it's a small-scale qualitative study on assessment and feedback. And I'm particularly interested in whether the feedback, the nature of feedback and the amount of the feedback varied across the grades you received. And because I'm quite interested that the feedback I received is sometimes or always not what I expected. So start from there. I do some literature about the teacher's intentions in providing feedback and the students' perceptions about the usefulness of the feedback to develop these two research questions. And I think there is a slightly different of my dissertation from my two classmates' dissertation because it's linked to a PTAS project. There were 6 students recruited to participate in this project, which led by Dr. Gale. And it aimed to investigate the experience of PGT students and the staff's experiences of the assessment and feedback happened within the school. And these 6 students, we have, apart from our supervisor, we also receive support from other academic staff and also the staff from Institute for Academic Development. And we got a chance to disseminate our findings at an education conference held in Dengdi. And it could be easier to assess the program, assess the setting, because some of the program director also participate in this project. But as I will say later, easier to assess the program doesn't equal to it's easy to recruit participants. So you need to be prepared for that. And I think there was one classmate asked me about my dissertation, and I said it's linked with a project. And he said to me, maybe out of jealousy, I don't know why, he said, lucky you don't need to do anything, you just help your supervisor. But I would like to highlight that this project student has the leading role. So apart from the topic area, each student have their own specific aims and purpose for their research and specific research questions. There is no such kind of utopia for just help supervisor and get your degree. And I think you can find some shortcuts during your journey in Europe, but during your learning journey, there is no such shortcut. So you just develop those research questions. So here's my research design. There are 4 tutors and 2 students participant in the one-to-one interviews. And I also analyzed 22 pieces of feedback from 4 courses, the written feedback on your essays. And I do the thematic analysis of the interview data and in-depth analysis of the feedback examples. For doing that, I need to modify some previous coding scheme to do so by reading a lot, actually. And here's my findings. It's quite surprised that the amount of feedback you received do vary across grades. And you can see sometimes, I think from the interview data, some tutors said that for a relatively weaker piece of work, they need more feedback and suggestions. So that's why this trend line was generated by Excel, actually. And here's the variation of types of feedback across grades. Yes, and you can see for a per piece of work, not per, a relatively weaker piece of work, they do receive more negative evaluations and some positive evaluations for a quite strong piece of work who get an 80 something, I remember that. So some reflections, those are the things I think is more difficult than I expected when I do I did my dissertation. The first is the recruit of participants. Sometimes they just don't want to participate because I attend several times, I think 3 times with in students meeting to recruit them, but I think at that time I'm not a people who welcome people on that program, so they just don't want to participate in. And also the conducting the interview is also it's not a daily conversation, but it should be let the participant feel like it's a daily conversation. So first, for doing that, you must very clear about your research purpose and your research questions in your mind very clearly. And during the interview, you need to recall them, unless you will lose your track, something like that. And transcribing the interviews, as two of my classmates, they all said that is very time consuming. And I think when I was a master student, I quite don't like to hear some PhD student or some researchers say this is time consuming, because I don't believe it. But it's, I think sometimes it's 1 hour interview, it will take me about a week to transcribe it, because I'm not a native English speaker, and some perception filter or something, I don't know what I written down, just not what they really speak. So it's very weird. So the suggestion is to have a very clear research question, because during the written up period, when it's a mess on the paper and it's a mess in your head, the only light in the darkness will be your research questions. So you need to use those questions to organize your whole process, and to keep in touch with your supervisor, and that's maybe helpful or not. And be prepared. That means I think when you write your proposal for master's dissertation or PhD proposal, sometimes you need to write some backup plan. And that's really useful. For example, when I conducted an interview, I found a very confidential room in this building, and very good sound effect to record it. However, 6 minutes after the interview started, the fire alarm also started. So I have to change, and you cannot panic at that time because your participants also there. So it's quite surprised, actually, as Susan said, he's be surprised. And also during the transcript session, one of my ear have some problem, so I just behave like Beethoven and to transcribe by 1 year. So that did happen, because during your dissertation period, everything in your life seems to be magnified, so just have some psychological preparation for that. And keep calm. That's also really important, because in Edinburgh, the summer is really short, but it's really colorful. And during your writing process, you will see on social media some of your classmates from other program or from your own program to show the trips they have. But you can only have your trip from your accommodation to library. So in that period, together with the song music during the festival, you really need to keep calm. And now you maybe wonder that all those things are the things that are more difficult than I expected. So what's the things that's easier than I expected? So I would like to say that when you overcome those difficulties, and by taking those suggestions, or by not taking those suggestions, you will feel that to get a good mark is easier than you are expected. And hopefully, I think all of you around this time next year, or for the part-time students the year next around this time, all of you can receive your Bonnie master's degrees. So congratulations in very advance. Thank you.
Okay, who's got the first question? literature review, and there's no experiment in your dissertation, and you focus on analysis of the literature. And the teacher said that it's better to lead you to a doctor's degree because your doctor, mainly the topic, your field, is associated with master. So is that true? Or,
So I was asking the literature review that we're doing for the dissertation would be useful for your doctor
I think what Yang is it? Yeah. No, what Yang's suggesting is that if you're thinking about doing a doctorate after your MSc, is it better to just do a desk-based dissertation and do the whole dissertation just be a literature review in preparation for the doctorate? Or do you think it would be better to do a dissertation which had some empirical work in it? Is that your question, yeah?
Great paraphrase. It's a good question. But I think it really depends on what you're looking at.
And also, for me, I enjoy doing empirical studies, so that's, I enjoy looking at the things that I encounter on a daily basis and interview people, so that's why I'm doing, empirical study. So if you're interested in something, like that, and I suppose you would do something like what I do, but if your research, what you're interested in is in a different field, then feel free to do a different style of doctorate study. I think there's no rule to that, is there?
Yeah, there's no right answer, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Is the topic of your master's dissertation the same with what you study in doctor?
But it's a tiny part. It's related because I'm really interested in the same context, but the people that I'm looking at and the questions I'm looking at are very different. Yeah, what about you guys?
So for me, it's related, but also very different, and I think it's probably hard to decide, and in the moment when you're thinking about your dissertation, already thinking ahead for your PhD, because there's so many things that can develop, and also insights that you will gain through your dissertation that will later on influence how you want to do your PhD, I guess. So, yeah, they can be related, but don't have to be the same thing.
I totally agree. I think within the process of doing a PhD, you're also looking at very different things. So research questions change, and the look at the specific, field might change a little bit, and you might have very unexpected answers to the research questions. So a lot of things change. Yeah. So, but it's good to think about it at this stage. Yeah.
Sorry, is this a mic?
Yeah. No, it's just like puppets, it's circle time.
Just shout.
Yeah, so with hindsight, what is the one thing that you wish past you knew? Sorry, so when you were doing, like now you're a PhD, but when you were a master's student, what did you wish you knew then?
In hindsight, any other things you wish you knew? I wish I would know that it takes so much time to do transcription.
What I didn't do, I think, so I did all the pilot study, but what I didn't do was the pilot transcription. I didn't know that it would take so much time, and I just kept doing it. When you're in the zone, you feel like I can do it if I just keep going, but losing sense of the bigger picture, perhaps, in terms of time management. So if I would do a different project, I might approach it differently. Yeah.
For me, maybe in the more joyful sense of how I didn't expect a research project to be that diverse, in the sense that you have all the theory you engage with, but you've also I had the interviews with young people who I really enjoyed chatting to, and I had this great experience of being on the mountains doing this expedition with them. So it was this whole very full, nice experience, and also unexpected things that happened. That sudden, like complexities, where I suddenly was asked to become a leader for this expedition because the teacher had dropped out, and I couldn't take this role because I was the researcher, and like things like that. But yeah, and the niceness of how many different things can be touched in a research project. Yeah. Maybe I would have wanted to know beforehand that Gale seems very scary, but it's actually really nice.
I'd add a little. I would add a little, maybe anecdotal evidence from myself, but also from observing other students doing their dissertation, which is that it might take a little bit longer to do the formatting that you might expect it at the moment. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Microsoft, Word, but there are a lot of good functions, in Word that you might not be familiar with, but could be really beneficial if you're working in a very long document. So if Nicola remembers, one of the first things I did when I started my PhD was to learn how to use Microsoft Word properly, which saves me a lot of time in the future, because all the chapters, you can basically have a format, set before you start writing everything. So, and then you just need to put them together, integrate them together, which is very easy. But I think a lot of students just start writing, and at the last day or the day prior to submission, they start to do all the formatting, and it's very confusing. So that's my suggestion. Yeah. It's very good. Any other question? Thank you.